Unknown flying objects, which nowadays are also referred to as Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, UAP, have been seen for centuries, and many famous contemporaries have cited them. For example, on October the 11th, 1492, near Bermuda, Christopher Columbus saw such an object and noted it in his logbook. A report came from the famous German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who had a strange encounter as a 16-year-old on a trip to Leipzig in the fall of 1765. In addition, later US Presidents Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter reportedly saw UFOs. Carter had his encounter in 1973 and even prepared a UFO sighting report, which can be viewed today in the National Archives. And Reagan saw a UFO from a Cessna over Bakersfield in 1974 when he was the governor of California. This is also seen by the pilot of the plane, Bill Paynter, as well as 2 security guards. Are these experiences simply unknown natural phenomena or extraterrestrial visitors? So, already existing at the time of the Second World War were the so-called Foo Fighters. The Allied pilots thought at first it was a German weapon system, which is why this phenomenon is known as Kraut fireballs. The surviving reports speak of different colors and sizes, and many pilots also report that the Foo Fighters accompanied them and performed various flight maneuvers. Still today, it's not clear what this was all about. The only certainty is that there are no reports of anyone being injured by them, and that they were seen by pilots not only over Europe, but also over other theaters of war, such as the Pacific. Then, after the war ended, the ghost rockets made headlines. From February to December 1946 alone, there were hundreds of sightings in Scandinavia, especially in Sweden. At first it was thought that these were meteorites or Soviet missile tests of captured German V-2s. However, this could not explain all of the reports and flight characteristics of the objects, especially since there was a UFO landing on May 18, 1946. Today, the UFO Memorial Ingelholm stands on this spot. This, of course, also called the American Air Force to be in on the plan and met with representatives of the Swedish Air Intelligence Service. In this report from November 4, 1948, formerly classified as top secret, it said that several trustworthy Swedish experts came to the conclusion that these phenomena are obviously the result of a high technical skill which cannot be credited to any presently known culture on Earth. They are therefore assuming that these objects originate from some previously unknown or unidentified technology, possibly outside the Earth. The sighting, reported by pilot Kenneth Arnold on June 24, 1947, triggered a real UFO hype. He saw 9 unusual flying objects near Mount Rainier in Washington state. He reportedly described the objects as elliptical, extremely shiny, and with a glass bell on top. The story was picked up by the Associated Press and circulated around the country, and his statement, "They flew erratically like a saucer if you skip it across the water," led to the term flying saucer. An inflation of sightings around the world followed. The most famous incident of an unidentified flying object occurred in Roswell in July 1947. Farmer Mac Brazel spotted unusual debris on his land and reported it to the local sheriff, George Wilcox, on July 7th. What happened next is inherently contradictory and not entirely comprehensible today. In any case, the found debris was collected by US military personnel, and the press officer of the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell, Walter Haut, the only squadron with nuclear weapons in the world at the time, spread the news that a flying saucer had crashed and been recovered. On July 8th, the Roswell Daily Record, among others, published on its front page, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. No details of flying disc are revealed." And even newspapers in California, like the Sacramento Bee, wrote on July 8th, "Army reveals it has flying disc found on ranch in New Mexico." This caused quite a stir, and that same day, the press release was retracted by the commander, Colonel Blanchard. In the meantime, the debris was transported to Fort Worth in Texas and later to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio for further examination. On the evening of July 8, 1947, Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey appeared before the press and announced that the debris was nothing more than the remains of a weather balloon. However, on that same day, Air Force Headquarters also notified the FBI in Dallas by telephone, who in turn wrote a memo addressed to the FBI office in Cincinnati. It reported that the flying disc was recovered near Roswell, was hexagonal in shape, and was suspended from a balloon by cable, but also that the experts at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base did not think it was a radar reflector from a weather balloon, as they said in a telephone call. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, 1895 to 1972, also thought nothing of the weather balloon story and demanded full access to the recovered disc. He handwrote a memo to Clyde Tolson, 1900 to 1975, the FBI's Associate Director, on July 15, 1947, adding, "I would do it, but before agreeing to it, we must insist upon full access to disc recovered." For instance, in the LA case, the Army grabbed it and would not let us have it for cursory examination. However, this event and the incidents surrounding it became very quiet about this event for about 30 years before Charles Berlitz and William L. Moore's book, The Roswell Incident, appeared in 1980, and only then did numerous eyewitnesses come forward with the most incredible stories. The story reached its peak in the mid-1990s, when a veritable inflation of books picked up on this event. In 1994, public pressure became so great that New Mexico Congressman Steve Schiff demanded a full investigation. The Pentagon responded and published the Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert that same year, admitting for the first time that it had not told the truth and covered it up in the operation. In fact, it was said to not be a weather balloon, but the remains of a balloon from Project Mogul, in which reflectors were to use balloons to reach the tropo or stratosphere to detect shock waves from Soviet nuclear weapons tests. In 1995, the US Government Accountability Office was put in charge of investigating the Roswell incident, but this did not satisfy the public. So in 1997, the Pentagon published a new report, the Roswell Report, Case Closed. In it, the US military revealed another secret project where new parachutes were tested between 1954 and 1959, and where human-like mannequins were also used. Regardless of the Air Force's publications, there are many people involved who tell a different story, and many Americans are not convinced by the Pentagon's explanation. Another well-known UFO sighting then comes from none other than Clyde W. Tombaugh, the American astronomer who discovered the dwarf planet Pluto. Tombaugh had his UFO sighting one night in August 1949 in New Mexico, whereby his wife and his mother-in-law also saw the noiseless blue-greenish triangles for about 3 seconds. I've done thousands of hours of night sky watching, but never saw a sight so strange as this. I doubt that the phenomenon was any terrestrial reflection because nothing of the kind has ever appeared before or since. I was so unprepared for such a strange sight that I was really petrified with astonishment. Around the same time, there were also repeated reports of green fireballs in New Mexico. Dr. Lincoln La Paz, an astronomer from the University of New Mexico and an expert on meteors, described the experiences of airplane crews who had seen the glow before he himself saw a green fireball on December 12, 1948. Numerous other sightings of this phenomenon were subsequently also reported from Los Alamos, where there was no scientist or technician who had not seen it. Due to numerous sightings, it could be ruled out that it was a trivial phenomenon, and at first a Soviet espionage operation was suspected, before the Life magazine in 1952 mentioned the phenomenon and titled, "Have We Visitors from Space?" Because of the many sightings, the US Air Force dealt with the phenomenon in several programs. The first was Project Sign, 1947 to 1948, followed by Project Grudge, 1949 to 1951. About the latter, astronomer J. Ellen Hynek said that this was less science and more of a public relations campaign. And although noted astronomer Donald Howard Menzel, president of the American Astronomical Society, wrote numerous books about the UFO phenomenon, saying that the UFO phenomenon was due to misinterpreted terrestrial phenomena, he too saw these luminous apparitions in May 1949, when he and his chauffeur left Holloman Air Force Base. He wrote about it in his book, Flying Saucers, 1953, reporting that he can't explain the phenomenon in any detail. Because of the UFO hysteria in the 1950s, Project Blue Book was established in 1952 and investigated sightings of UFO phenomena until 1969. Out of 12,618 cases investigated, 701 could not be solved, 5.5% of the cases. It was investigated whether the phenomenon posed a danger and whether it contained new technological developments. Critics, among them also considerable researchers, criticized that more was covered up than cleared up, and that from the outset, as a goal, the UFO phenomenon was downplayed. Due to the Freedom of Information Act, the documents are freely accessible today and can also be accessed via the internet as a microfilm archive. An incident, for example, from the summer of 1965, in which numerous eyewitnesses, including several Oklahoma Highway Patrol troopers as well as meteorologists who tracked the objects with weather radar, spoke of strange luminous phenomena and shows the reconnaissance work of the project team. Indeed, the members of Project Blue Book declared that the eyewitnesses had seen only the planet Jupiter and bright stars like Rigel and Betelgeuse. However, this was contradicted by the director of the Oklahoma Science and Art Foundation, Robert Weiser, who remarked, "That is as far from the truth as you can get. These stars and planets are on the opposite side of the Earth from Oklahoma City at this time of year. The Air Force must have had its starfinder upside down during August." Then, in February 1960, an article appeared in the New York Times that attracted greater attention. Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, 1897 to 1982, Vice Admiral and first Director of the CIA from 1947 to 1950, made it clear that there was much more to the UFO phenomenon than officially appeared. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. The German astrophysicist and long-time UFO researcher Illobrand von Ludwiger wrote in one of his books, "For most scientists who deal with UFOs, it's not this phenomenon that is actually incomprehensible, but the way in which our society, scientists, politicians, and the media manages to overlook one of the most disturbing phenomena of our time. You can joke about it, deny the facts, but simply not taking note of them for decades is a feat that will greatly astonish the psychologists and sociologists who will later study the behavior of the people of our time." In 1999, the French COMETA report, titled UFOs and Defense, What Should We Prepare For?, was released, and this one had it all. There, generals, admirals, high-ranking Air France employees, police chiefs, and well-known scientists came to the conclusion that the existence of UFOs as a real phenomenon is quasi-proven and the extraterrestrial hypothesis is favored. In 2007, France published further UFO files, which were compiled by GPAN, a government and scientific body that is part of the French space agency CNES. Great Britain followed in 2008, but the British files of the Ministry of Defence (MOD) contained the odd surprise. Some readers were surely astonished, since the files refer to the Rendlesham Forest incident, where one could read that the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio allegedly supported flying saucers and alien corpses. In addition, American politicians such as Barry Goldwater were reportedly denied access. And at least the story of Barry Goldwater, 1909 to 1998, Arizona senator and former Republican presidential candidate, can be verified. On YouTube, in books, and in the Rockefeller Report of 1995, the following quote can be found from him. "The subject of UFOs is one that's interested me for some long time. About 10 or 12 years ago, I made an effort to find out what was in the building at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the information is stored that has been collected by the Air Force, and I was understandably denied the request. It's still classified as top secret." Denmark was the next European country to follow in 2009, but other EU countries such as Spain or Italy also run military UFO research programs and have often made files available to the public. Most recently, the revelations of the New York Times made headlines about the Pentagon's secret UFO research program, about which we've already created a separate video. What do you think's behind the UFO phenomenon? Write your opinion in the comments.